Okay, I think we're recording. So we are live. So hello everybody. Welcome back to another episode of my podcast. Today I'm joined by David De Matheu. So hi David, how's it going?
Hey, how are you? I'm doing great.
I'm doing good as well. So the theme for today is we're going to talk about how AI and communication will pan out in the future. So all this recent development with ChatGPT, and I think Google also announced their AI model today, Brad or something like that.
Yeah, Bard, I
Yeah,
think.
so we're gonna talk. Yeah, Bard. So we're gonna talk about that. So I guess before we dive into that, David, you can give a description of yourself. So what do you do at Microsoft?
Yeah, for sure. I am a product manager on the Azure Communication Services team. I work specifically on our developer experiences. So figuring out how to help developers use our product. And probably more importantly to this conversation, I also work on some of the different integration points that we have between Azure Communication Services and other Azure and third-party services. So yeah, that's kind of my day job.
Mm-hmm. So I guess do you want to talk a bit about Azure Communication Services? What is that for people who are unfamiliar with it?
Yeah, for sure. So Azure Communication Services is a communications managed platform. So what that means is that we provide communication services like SMS, email, voice and video calling, chat, and we provide them all as a fully hosted Azure service. So as a developer, you're actually able to pick and run with a lot of these services with only a couple lines of code, and you don't have to deal with all the mess in the background of how to get these things to be alive and to like be ready and scalable for your customers. Like we deal with all that for you. So yeah, we do a little bit of that, and yeah, particularly kind of across all of those channels, where we sit kind of on top of the same infrastructure that powers other large services at Microsoft like Teams and Skype. And so we have a pretty cool and robust service behind us.
Yeah. And I guess there's one thing I wanted to ask you. So you mentioned you're a product manager. So in one of my episodes earlier, I interviewed Jorge, who is a program manager at Microsoft. So I'll link that interview down below if you guys want to check it out. So he was a program manager and you're a product manager. So what's the difference between the two?
That's a hard question always. So I think that the and this is more of an opinion because I think everyone I think that there's a definition, but then there's kind of like everyone has their opinion of this. Like I think that when it comes to like product management, it tends to lean more towards the strategy definition for a product. So really thinking about kind of what are the customer pain points, what does the market look like, what does the monetization opportunity look like, and kind of build a product strategy around it. Versus program management tends to be more on the execution side of like making sure that like a program is being successfully driven both at an engineering level as well as like at a business level. But at the end of the day, I think across the industry they're sort of interchangeable. Like you'll find a lot of people that have either title and they're kind of doing either one of the things.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of my take on it.
Okay. Okay, well, now on to the good stuff that we've been waiting for, which is talking about AI and communication. So I guess first, we'll just talk about ChatGPT. I guess you can just give a brief description to people who, for some reason, have no idea what that is. I don't know how you don't know, but for some people who have no idea.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, ChatGPT has pretty much taken kind of the world by storm. Uh, I mean, at a high level, it's a large language model. What that means is that it's a model that's been or a neural network, more specifically, that's been trained to be really good at processing information and making conversation out of that. I think like one of the big differences that we see kind of with those models versus like models in the past is that the output of these models are a lot more human-like.
Yeah.
it doesn't necessarily mean that the bot is smarter, as we've seen kind of in cases where like ChatGPT has been wrong or the information, because ultimately the model's as good as the data it's trained on. But from a conversational perspective, these models are really good and they almost feel human when you're interacting with them, which is I think like one of the big breakthroughs that we saw with kind of these models.
So they've been like ChatGPT, for instance, like these type of models have existed for a couple of years, but like with this iteration, it's been fine-tuned such that like you're like talking to a human.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. I think that like part of the, especially with the ChatGPT model, because within the GPT models you have kind of quite a range of them that are optimized towards different tasks, whether it's like summarization or content generation. But I think with the ChatGPT model specifically, I think kind of one of the breakthroughs, at least from my perspective, has been kind of the ability for it to hold all that context in, and be able to kind of drive conversation in a way that definitely feels pretty close to human,
yeah.
in many ways.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I think not only that, but I think it's also the amount of just functionality it has. Like for example, and you guys will see it in the description of this video. Like I can tell ChatGPT like write a description of this video like in the style of Shakespeare, for example. So
yeah,
and it's really good at like doing that, like just a wide range of what do you call it, like data set that's been trained on
yeah,
that you could.
yeah. The data set has been like I think it's definitely crazy. Like I mean, I don't think we've had a model that's been trained on that much data. Um,
Mhm.
at the same time, I think like the part that is kind of interesting is that like again the model's only as good as the data, and so because of the amount of
Mhm.
data that it needs to train, it means that like often the models are also not up to date or like are not necessarily 100% right all the time. Um, I think that like will be interesting kind of in the future as we kind of take some of these conversational models that are really good at like writing or
Mhm.
generating responses and like making them really human and combining them with other models that are optimized towards other things. Like I kind of always give this example where like imagine taking something like the Spotify AI, because Spotify has a big AI behind it that does all that
Mhm.
recommendation. Spotify's AI is probably terrible at writing, but it's great at like figuring out what song you want to listen to next.
Mhm.
And so I think it'll be interesting to see as you start pairing these things together, like take an AI that's like really good at something and take another one that's really good at like GPT models or ChatGPT that's really good at
Yeah.
generating content or really good at like writing responses and putting them together. I think we'll get some interesting scenarios as well.
Mhm. I think the term for what you're describing is I think GAI, like general artificial intelligence, I think. So
Yeah,
just
well,
like one agent that is like that doesn't have one specialization, but it's general across like multiple domains.
yeah. I think that like I mean that's kind of what has been attempted with like ChatGPT, or at least how people use it. Like
Hmm.
people will ask questions about anything, and the thing
Yeah.
is like looks like magic because it can answer everything. I think that I actually think that what we'll see is kind of the opposite of that, where we'll see like specialized versions of this, where it's
Hmm.
less about the general knowledge of it and more about like, hey, here's this like really human-like entity that is like really good at like one topic, but like it's a really hard topic and like it's gonna make it like it's great. And like and kind of from the communications aspect, like that's kind of one of the things that we've been like looking at a lot about, because um for us, like when we look at something like Azure Communication Services, like you might ask like what does Azure Communication Services have to do with AI? Like I mean it's a valid question. Ultimately, like one of the things that we kind of think about is that like all these models are gonna end up having to communicate with people, and you need to be able to somehow reach people. And like the
Hmm.
reality of kind of how our society works is that like you reach people through like calling them, you can text them, you can WhatsApp them, you
No.
can messenger message them, you can
No.
like like I mean and so that's kind of where as we talk about some of these like specialized AI models, like we start to think about all these like really interesting scenarios where like imagine if like your doctor had a model that's like been trained with all the medical knowledge, but it's still conversational in a way that ChatGPT is, and like now you suddenly have a doctor. Like, and what if you could have that doctor on like on a text message so that like you could like very easily text them and be like, oh, like I'm feeling bad about this, and like it would text you back an answer.
Yeah.
Like I think it starts to like become kind of like a very interesting perspective, like when we think about how we can democratize those models to kind of be at everyone's fingertips in such an easy way, as well as how we can train them with this context. So
And I think this is something you worked on as you played around with as well, was I think with Microsoft Power Apps and using
yeah,
Azure Communication Services SMS service.
yeah, like I think that like we've been playing around a lot with all different things that have to do with OpenAI recently, and I think we've been prototyping a number of different use cases that we think are interesting. So yeah,
I
we've
guess, do you
been
just want to explain that to the audience, like that specific demo that you worked on?
sure,
Well, well,
sure.
I guess,
Oh, sorry, go
well,
ahead.
I guess I'm sure you've worked on multiple ones, but the one that I've seen, I think,
Oh
was
yeah,
the Star Wars one.
oh
I
yeah,
think,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
So I think like there's been like I think two things that we've been playing around with a lot, and like I think the demo that you talk about like is like aligned to one of them. So the two things that we've been playing around a lot is like one, understanding how can we make it like really easy to connect these models onto like everyone's fingertips. And so in this case, it's like how do you put a model like that on a text message, or like how do you put it on a chat or on a call, etc. And so that demo that you're talking to, we wanted to kind of like not only connect it to something, but also like figure out like what is like the fastest way to do it. And this was like, I mean, not to share like too much like insider baseball on like what was on the team, but like one of my other coworkers had built a very similar demo, but it was a lot of code. There was a lot of code involved, and so I was kind of competing with him to try to see how much could we reduce the demo out on. And so we ended up building a demo where using Power Apps, or sorry, Power Automate, which is
Oh yeah.
part of the Microsoft Power Platform. I think that the entire demo, or like end to end to build it, takes less than 10 minutes. And where we're able to connect like a phone number through Azure Communication Services to a GPT model that's been like trained, like I mean when I say trained, like there's like we've built like and designed a prompt for it that makes it believe that it is Obi-Wan Kenobi, and then we've put it on that text message so that you can text it from your phone and it will respond to you. And so like that part's like kind of wild, like the idea that like in less than like I think like 10 or so minutes you can have like an end-to-end demo that like works on your phone. It's deployed in like production on Power Automate, and which is using like these models. So like that actually I think is a big like kudos to the Azure OpenAI team and the wider OpenAI team on like how good that developer experience is, like, and how much they've done to kind of democratize that. Because like when I look at those things like and those demos and like look at ChatGPT, like the first thing in my mind is like this is probably like super hard to do. Like this looks like insanely hard to do. But like what we've seen is that like it's actually quite easy. And to hype it up to the audience a little bit, we're gonna be releasing that demo actually externally soon. So actually everyone's gonna be able to see it.
Oh yeah.
It'll be out probably. When is this going live? It might beat you to it. I don't know. We'll see.
Maybe sometime this week. So we're recording February
Well,
7th, I
maybe
think.
in the description of this video we will have the
Sure.
link
Yeah.
to the demo, because it is coming. It is going to be coming out, and it like again like 10 minutes, and you have a phone number with with a bot that talks like Obi-Wan Kenobi and
Yeah.
will tell you everything is all right, like Obi-Wan, and it's great. Like,
Yeah, well, this sounds super cool. So people who are curious, you guys can check it out. Hopefully, it is live by the time this goes up. And I think so. It's like what this I think has a lot of applications that I can think of. Like one is the element of just the developer experience, like how you don't have to invest a lot of time to be able to like create something like this end to end. And then the other thing is like this can expand into so many different industries. Like the example that's coming into my head, say like you're a clinic and you want like some type of this like SMS support, you can just have this model configured to like common questions that are asked for your clinic, or even a bit go a layer deeper, like maybe some medical, like simple medical questions, for example. And then people, your customers, they can just, if they have a question or anything, they can just text this message and it will give a response on like behalf of the clinic or something like that. So like the application of this applies to like
oh.
so many different fields. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of at the core of the power that we think like something like Azure Communication Services brings to like the table with these things, because and kind of what I'm excited about, which is that like democratizing effect that it has, where like you take these models and like you suddenly put them in someone's fingertips through WhatsApp or SMS or whatever they want to use, or like one of the things I'm actually really excited about is like I don't know if you've heard about there's like, I mean, obviously there's OpenAI and GPT models, but Microsoft has also been working on some of what they call the Valley models, which are the voice like
Oh yeah,
the
you
text
give
to
it like a
speech.
3 second. You give
Exactly,
it
yeah,
a three
that
second
one.
voice sample. Oh yeah,
Like
yeah.
imagine if like your doctor trained one of those
Oh
models so that it
yeah,
sounds
yeah.
like them, and so like now you suddenly have a bot that is
Is
conversational,
essentially a
has all
doctor. Yeah.
this context that you've provided it, and it's like really good at like parsing through the context and like summarizing information. But it also sounds like your doctor. So
Yeah.
like suddenly you're like, oh, like, when I call them, instead of like feeling like I'm talking to like some robot that like might be like cold or like weird, for all I know, I'm talking to my actual doctor. Like it almost becomes impossible to like know whether it's the bot or
Yeah.
the doctor talking. So I'm actually like excited for kind of like that like next range of applications, and like I think we're gonna be seeing a lot of those actually pretty soon. Like I like at the rate that this stuff is moving, like I think I wouldn't be surprised that before the end of the year we're starting to see the first set of applications that are doing that type of stuff. So it's exciting, and again, like that's like kind of what excites me about kind of that intersection between communications and AI, where and like putting that on the tips of everyone, I think is like really interesting.
Yeah. And I guess just to give you guys a bit of context, so people who couldn't follow what David was talking about, so Microsoft released, I think, a new model. What was the name of it? You mentioned
Yeah,
Sally something.
Bali, I think it was like it's
Valley,
like
yeah. So the way it works essentially, like at a super high level, you give it a 3 second or like a 5 second audio input, like of someone talking, and then you can essentially just clone their voice. So you can just give it a text input, and it would just spit out an audio file in that person's voice, like saying that stuff. So this is, and I guess so I wanted to touch upon one thing when we're talking about this is how do you think now with like all this AI evolution that's coming, like this new products that are now going to enable people to deliver like even greater communication experiences, how do you think that, like, let's focus on one core scenario, which is customer support. Like say customer support, for example, how do you think like this AI is playing in like making customer support more efficient? Like, how do you see that scenario playing out?
yeah
Maybe.
yes
Well, I guess we can talk about it in different layers. So I guess layer one would be just replacing, I guess, existing customer support
yeah
methods. So
so
you hire someone, you train them to like, this is how you reply to this email and so on and so forth. Now with this type of tech, and like you wouldn't need that method now of like manual human training.
yeah so I think, as you said, like there's a couple of layers to that, and like I think that like 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 long-term layer that I think about is like we get to a point where we replace like an entire person with a model, like especially because like you know, when we look at like something like customer support scenarios, like there's a decent percentage of the cases. I don't have the exact metric in my head right now, but there's a decent set of them of events that happen or calls that happen where the information required by the person is not something that like takes rocket science to answer. Like it's like, hey, like what are your hours? Like my hours are this. Like, hey, um, like I'm not seeing the
I
charge,
want.
but like the charges here. Like, hey, I would like to like change my name on the subscription. Like, oh, I can change it. Like things that are like very like that can be somewhat like automated. And these conversational models can be really good at that, like be able to change those old IVR systems of like press one for this, press two, or like into
Yeah.
something that's more conversational. I think is definitely gonna be kind of out there. That said, I think we also think about this from the perspective that um, these models don't always need to be like a replace, like don't always need to replace people because like the reality is that like you still need people to be able to interact with. You still need there's certain tasks that you might still want a human to be able to do. Like you might not trust an AI to do everything, so you still need a human for a number of interactions, especially if those interactions are maybe you know like restrictive in nature or are
Yeah.
sensitive in nature. Um, so this is where I think like the other layer that like I think about is like these technologies have the potential to be co-pilots and like kind of like if you saw today Satya talk about some of the Bing announcement, he kind of mentions this, which is like we think that a lot of these technologies co-pilot. What that means is that like by Copilot is that this is it's not gonna be the driving force. It's gonna sit next to you and help you achieve that task faster. We see this with like the GitHub Copilot. Like I don't know if you use it,
Oh
but
yeah.
like it makes you code crazy fast. It like pulls methods and things out of thin air that are like hard to believe that you didn't even have I hadn't even thought about, and like it's just doing it. Um, so like that same type of Copilot model applies to something like a support center, where if I am an agent and for every call I need to go out and like find information or go understand like what the right thing to do is, or even like collect someone's information or collect their credit card number or collect something that I'm gonna need for the
Yeah.
interaction, those are all tasks that like a co-pilot AI could be helping me with.
Yeah.
And so imagine you're sitting there as a support agent, call comes in, they're asking questions, you don't necessarily know the answer, but Copilot is listening and tells you like, hey, like the answer is that you need to ask them to go do this. So it kind of replaces like those normal manuals that sometimes support agents have where they're going through question and answer into something that's maybe more conversational. But then it also might replace the ability for that agent to say, hey Copilot, like I'm gonna leave you on this call because I'm gonna go take another call. Like all I need you to do is like confirm with the user that stuff worked, and if it didn't work, like call me back. So like that suddenly makes that agent way more efficient because instead of having to sit through a customer debugging the thing and which depending on what it is could take 20 30 minutes, like they can say like, you know what, like I'm gonna leave Copilot on the call. Copilot's gonna is smart
Yeah.
enough to like know the context, has already been listening, so it has all the context. It's smart enough to answer maybe basic questions that come up during that debugging, and in case anything goes bad, it can always call me back, and I can like put the other call on hold and come back.
Yeah,
So
but
the
I think it is definitely something that will work hand in hand. Like just taking the customer support example, I think it will definitely increase efficiency. But I also think like I can foresee a reduced need for like actual human workers in customer support, just
well,
because you can have these type of models.
Well, yeah, like I mean, like if you can make those agents more efficient, it means you need less of them to like do the same task. And so I do think that there's definitely like gonna be kind of part of that like that evolution is gonna be where if we can make agents 20% more productive with a co-pilot that's listening and providing inputs and taking care of some of the more boring parts of the interaction where you don't really need a human, and you make them 20% more efficient, you're going to need 20% less people to do the job. And so that definitely, I think that
Yep.
there's kind of a consequence there where we might see less support agents. But
Yeah. And I guess another thing on this note is that, so how do you see, like, just we'll take customer support as an example. How do you see like these new language, these super powerful language models that are coming? How do you think what impact they will have, like across different regions, across different cultures, like being used for translations and so on? Because I think that
yeah,
is also another interesting area. Like, say you're a company, you have like support teams, like one for English, one for Arabic, one
mhm,
for this language, and so on. But I think these,
yeah,
like utilizing these models, it can like unlock like a bridge. Like you just have one central customer support scenario, and then you just
yeah.
use these models to communicate across like different languages.
Yeah, I haven't played too much with the translation stuff, but like I do know that they're pretty good at like translating. I think that there's definitely opportunities there where you might expect them to, especially as you get into that like the first layer that we talked about, like where you're almost replacing people. Like it could mean that one single model is taking care of Spanish, English,
Hmm.
Portuguese, like doesn't matter what language, it's understanding everything and responding in the correct language. Um, I think that like you could also think about ways that it might be able to help like in that similar like co-pilot type function be able to serve as like almost like a real-time translator to the person. um
Yeah.
I think that the one thing that I do think about there is that like ultimately like that technology has been around for a little bit longer, like
Yeah.
we can do some of that real-time translation. um
But I think
I,
what's unique here is that like this like this text generation that is almost like indistinguishable from like actual conversation. I think that's the new breakthrough here, because like Google Translate has been like going on for like so many years, and I think does Bing have Translate? I'm not sure,
yeah,
but
yeah, but Bing has translate. Well, and then you have I mean, like you have Azure Cognitive Services with like
hmm
translation,
yeah.
AWS, Google Cloud, like they all have like kind of their translation models, right?
Yeah. But I think the element here is that the opportunity now is that this type of generation, after like, so you have the translation and then you generate these responses that are like just human like. I think that's the new
Yeah,
um
yeah,
the opportunity here.
yeah, definitely. Like, yeah, I think it definitely has potential to produce some interesting scenarios. I think going back to the keynote today from Satya, I think there was a one of the anecdotes that I think he shared was kind of on a similar vein around kind of like that, bringing that translation between cultures, and being able to like the models do seem to be very good at like understanding intent and like even
Hmm.
translating intent across cultures and dialects. So I think that's definitely gonna be really cool to see. Um, and definitely I think it's gonna apply to a number of different industries where you kind of continue to like have to deal with people with all kinds of backgrounds coming in.
Yeah.
So oh, for sure.
Yeah. Do you think Satya's keynote was written by
I
ChatGPT?
hope so. I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of funny because like we've been like I mean I personally been doing a lot more writing with ChatGPT. Like I think one of the one of the things that I've been doing after this was actually a suggestion from my boss, one of my coworkers, that like he's been starting to write almost everything inside of VS Code because you have Copilot on it,
Hmm.
and it's wild. I mean, like we definitely do a lot. I've been doing a lot more writing now, just within there, and like using Copilot or ChatGPT to help. it does make you more efficient. I can't wait for this stuff to be on Word and whatnot. Like so,
Oh yeah, yeah.
suddenly you're doing everything with it. Um,
Well, I can
it,
tell you
it
like my sorry to cut you off, sorry.
I was just gonna say, I mean, it is a little bit of a double-edged sword. Because again, like this is like where some of the like how correct these models are is kind of like funny. Like they're really right sometimes, but when they're wrong, they're like really wrong.
Yeah.
Um, but one of the things that I always said like that I love about it is like I think humans in nature are really good at like correcting things. Like
Mhm.
if I were to tell you like, hey, could you write like a 10-page essay, you'd be like, fuck, like that's like such a long essay, like that's
Yeah.
like so much work. But if I told you like, hey, could you like proofread and like correct one, like that's like an easier task. Like, oh, I'm gonna redo
Hmm.
it. Like, and so that's actually one of the things that I've like that's how I use these models personally, where like I just like love to have it write things and then for me to correct it because like that's what I can do better. Like I
Yeah.
correct things, but
But then
uh
again, these models, they're learning models, so they're not like one time. So every time someone corrects them, they are getting better and better. And I guess
yeah.
so one thing I wanted your thoughts on, which was, do you think like with now businesses starting to integrate language models into their businesses, like for unique scenarios, whether it be like customer support or like automating some tasks, or just like internal content generation, do you think like do you foresee any type of like security or like privacy or like ethical challenges with this type of integration?
Yeah, I'm not. I'll caveat by saying I'm not 100% an expert on this, but like I think at a
Hmm.
high level, um, just with the information accuracy, I think you have kind of an ethical dilemma,
Hmm.
because if if you're putting this type of model in front of people and you're telling them, hey, this thing is gonna give you answers and the thing is wrong, like there's some liability you suddenly have on what the thing
Hmm.
is saying, which I think is going to be really interesting to navigate. Like I can't wait for the first court case that we're like we'll have around this. Like oh like
Oh yeah.
the bot
Well,
told me that
talking
this was true and like
yeah, yeah. Talking about court cases, do you have you heard of the I think in New Zealand they're doing on I think later next week they've trained an AI to present to be a defense lawyer for in an actual case
yeah
to present some type of argument. Have you heard about that?
yeah yeah that stuff is wild. Like
Yeah.
uh um it's really the power of this stuff.
Yeah, well, no,
uh
the wild thing is like now we're seeing the integration of this stuff in like actual real life, like court scenarios and so on. So
yeah yeah no
yeah.
that no I mean it's really cool to see that. But I mean, going back to your like your question, so yeah, I
Hmm.
think ethically, like there's gonna be some stuff around the accuracy. I mean, that court case, for example, like what if you lose the case? Like suddenly it's like,
Hmm. Yeah.
like was this thing right? Like why did it do that? So I think that's gonna be interesting. Privacy, I think there's definitely some considerations. Ultimately, we're training these models with insane amounts of data. I think on one hand, we gotta make sure the training data is good. It's we're not giving it proprietary or private information of anyone.
Hmm.
But then even as we're going through, I think these companies like Microsoft, Google, OpenAI are going to have a huge just a huge responsibility in making
Yeah.
sure that as they're training these models further with either information you're giving them or whatever like that, they're doing so in a way that is private and so I think that's
Yeah,
going to be
because
important.
that's the one issue I think Copilot has been running into, which is like giving you suggestions of code from other
Yeah,
like actual like what's it called? I think intellectual property,
yeah,
like copyrighted code basically.
yeah.
Because I think I read an article on this that I think GitHub and Microsoft were being sued by by some firm on
Mhm.
like just this copy and pasting of like copyrighted code. So I
Yeah.
guess like moving on to like actual like human data, like personal data, I think this huge responsibility on companies.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also going to be interesting from the perspective that, like, once you have these like models running, and you're like asking them for questions, like I think it's gonna be important that like if they're providing answers that are giving you that are taking some information from others, that like we continue to think about things like sources, like making sure we
Mm-hmm.
continue to do that. And I thought that like that's actually one of the things that I kind of really liked out of the demo that happened today with the Bing on the Bing side, where I don't know if you saw this, that like when Bing would give you an answer with ChatGPT, everything had sources on it. So they would like link to different articles or different sources where they took the information out. And I think that that's kind of like the right thing to do. Like I don't know if it's a perfect system. Like some might argue that like, oh, you might need to pay those people, or you might like, but I think like at a minimum, like going back to like high school like English class when you're writing an essay and they were like put your sources at the end, like I think that's kind of like the minimum that the thing can do. Be like, hey, I
Mm-hmm.
learned this from here. I'm gonna try to at least like point to the entity, the author of the
Yeah.
content.
I think one issue I can see that is that because these models, they're generative models, so they generate, like say with ChatGPT, it generates text. So like
Yeah,
whatever the blob of text that it generated, you can't necessarily find it anywhere.
yeah.
But just the data set is so huge that it's been trained on. Like how do you address like this? Like who gets
No,
credited and so on. I think that's also another
no.
major issue. Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to kind of chat with some of the, I mean, with some of the folks over in the Bing team and how they did
Mhm.
that, because like to me it was kind of fascinating how they like were able to kind of like add sources to things. Because you're right, like I mean ultimately the model's being trained with so much data, like probably impossible to be like this was the source that like
No, they probably
generated
have
this
another
this
model that just evaluates sources.
maybe. Yeah.
Yeah.
But like I think it's good to understand that, because um at the end of the day, like the model is only as successful as the training data that is provided. And like I think that if we're gonna continue to train these models to make them better, we should definitely think about ways to make sure that we incentivize people continuing
Hmm.
to create content, and it doesn't become kind of this thing of like what's the point of me doing this because like it's gonna get stolen by this thing.
Yeah.
So I think that that's definitely gonna be interesting for us to see kind of moving forward. But so far I've been pleasantly happy with that. Obviously,
Hmm.
like I think that across other scenarios, this becomes less of an issue, especially going back to some of the use cases that we discussed today, like where you might be training it with your own proprietary data. Then it doesn't matter, like you're like it's your data, you're doing some custom training on it, like whatever. But I think that in cases where it's more on the public side and it's like you're creating more of those like generalized AI models, like I mean that knowledge is coming from somewhere.
Hmm.
It's
And
like
and
that,
and
that
and also, I guess another interesting twist to add for the audience here is that this, I think we're still talking about like text-based models here. There's the world of image-based models that's completely separate. And I think now with the voice one that you mentioned, and then also like when you mix the two, you have like this like video generation. You can just describe a scene and just like generate. I
yeah.
think it's just super cool. The application of all this.
Yeah, no, that stuff is coming. I think OpenAI said that they would have there was some type of demo around video that was coming up. Like that's gonna be crazy to see for sure.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. Okay, well, thank you so much, David.
No,
This was a super, super, super interesting conversation with you.
yeah, no,
And
no worries. Thank you so much for having me. And as I mentioned, hopefully by the time this is live, we'll have
yes, we
some
will have
demos
that.
linked on the bio, so people can see some of the early steps, because I think it's still early steps, but some of the first steps we're taking in thinking about how communications and some of these like large language models coexist together,
Hmm.
and hopefully it inspires people to go build really awesome stuff with it. So
Yeah.
uh,
And yeah, so in the description, we'll have links for you guys to play around with a couple demos. And the description and a summary of this video will also be written by ChatGPT in the format of Shakespeare. So be on the lookout for that as well. And yeah, well, thank you so much, David, for joining us. And I guess let me know in the comments below what you guys thought about on some of the stuff that we talked about. I'll have timestamps in the description below. So we'll see you guys in the next episode. Well, thank you so much, David.
Thank you.